Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call this public caucus to order. If everybody would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This afternoon, we have a public presentation and an update from the independent financial consultants that we hired a year ago, PFM. We also have from PFM, Gordon Mann, Rose Tesler, Jonas Crass from the Department of Community and Economic Development, and Dave Bulzoni, our CFO. Before we begin, I just want to take a moment to remind the public where we were as a county just 1 year ago. This time last year, Lackawanna County was staring down a financial crisis, running out of cash before 2024 ended, growing structural deficit in the amount of $37 million, $19 million in unpaid bills from the year prior, a government that was borrowing just to pay its own bills. The county was out of road to kick the can down. I knew at that time that if we didn't act, we'd be facing massive layoffs, service cuts, or worse, insolvency. That's why I made the tough decisions last year, decisions that were not easy and certainly were not popular. But I made them because it was the right thing to do for the taxpayers, for our employees, and for the future of Lackawanna County. We raised revenues responsibly, cut wasteful spending, began paying down our debts, and started tackling our long-term obligations head on. Today's presentation from PFM, our independent financial consultants, is not about politics, it's about the facts. It's about whether those decisions that we made last year worked, and I think the numbers will speak for themselves. We certainly are not out of the woods yet. We still have a lot of work to do, but leadership isn't about doing what's popular, it's about doing what's necessary to protect the people that you serve, and that's exactly what has been done over the last year and a half. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Gordon Mann from PFM to walk us through their update. Gordon?
Thank you, Commissioner. Nice to see everyone again, and special thanks to the IT people for getting us set up despite my late change. So by way of reintroduction, Commissioner already did a pretty good job with this, but just as a reminder, Rose and I are from a company called Public Financial Management. We do exactly what our name says around the Commonwealth and around the country. We help public sector entities manage their finances better in a way that is not just about producing good bank balances and solid audits and all that sort of thing that make finance people excited, but about having money in support of the things you need it for. We were brought in by the Department of Community and Economic Development. Jonas Crass here representing the department today. Brought in last year under what's called the Strategic Management Planning Program, lots and lots of acronyms here in the beginning. And I think it was last year around this time, let's see, what is this, early October. So I guess it would have been a little earlier than this. We were here to talk about how you close a budget deficit for 2025 that we had projected was around $31 million. And before that, we were here to talk about how you'd close a cash balance deficit that is about $13 million. Two different forms of accounting. Cash is what you have on hand to pay your bills today. What's called modified accrual is how budgets are done. Just the way two different ways of counting the same dollars, but when you run out of dollars, it doesn't matter how you count them. So we thought that after working with the county from really early this year, where we were re-engaged up to this point and as needed going forward, we thought this was a good time to update everyone on how the county is doing. We've been having meetings with the commissioners, both of them, and with some other staff, but we wanted to bring the public and the department directors and other elected officials into the know. If you wanted to summarize this very quickly and then kind of move on to what I would say is the county's position is better but not fixed. Better but not fixed from a cash flow perspective, better but not fixed from a budgetary perspective, and better but not fixed from a structural position. This may also be the earliest preview you get of what the county is thinking about or facing from a 2026 budget. Keep in mind that, again, that just as last year, Rose and I are not the budget office. So Dave and Mary Jo Granahan and others will have the official presentation of that. We can tell you what we see heading into that budget release. So let's start with the most basic form of financial management, which is as simple as it sounds, cash accounting. You either have cash or you don't. You want to be able to pay your bills on time. Your bills include employee salaries, they include benefits, they include pension contributions, everything that's up there. You want to be able to, again, pay them on time. A bill isn't fixed by just sticking it in the drawer and hoping it goes away. County is a very large, county governments are very large. They have lots and lots of funds. Lackawanna County is no exception, and you need to be able to move the money where it's supposed to be. And the county, Lackawanna County, like a lot of other local governments or county governments in Pennsylvania, relies on a borrowing early in the year where they borrow money from a bank, in this case about $15 million. You use that to pay your bills, your electricity, your pension, or not your pension benefits, your employee benefits, your salaries for the first 3 or 4 months until real estate taxes start to arrive. And then once those taxes arrive, you pay the bank back. It's what's called a tax anticipation note. And this year's the county has had kind of consistently over the last couple of years about $15 million. So need to be able to pay that back by December 31st in essence so that you can get a new one on January 2nd of 2026 and start the cycle again. If you remember what we talked about with cash balance last year, the goal is not to balance to zero. The goal is not expenses equal. That's the goal to some extent from a budget. Revenues balance expenses, and if they balance, that's great. And that's it. That's what you're shooting for. From cash, you want to be able to carry some cash out of last year into next year. You'd ideally like to be able to carry so much that you didn't need to do that cash flow borrowing, right? So if we're talking about a general cash target, somewhere in the realm of $20 million is about what Lackawanna County should really have on hand across its general fund. And spoiler alert, you're not going to end anywhere close to that this year. But again, when you see the numbers, the reminder here is we're not just trying to get to phew. We got to zero at the end of December 31st. We win because the next day is another day with more expenses, and you need to have cash on hand for those. We do, however, have been focused on getting the county to pay all of its bills and not to sit on them, which is the story of 2024 entering 2025. You may remember that the county last year had about 13 months of expenses for 12 months of revenue. You don't have to have an advanced math degree to figure out that that doesn't work. So part of the goal here is not to just get the county through this year, but to get it through by paying off its bills in as timely a fashion as possible. That does not mean that the county would carry no bills. Things will get broken. The generic example, sink breaks on December 27th, plumber fixes it on December 28th, you get the bill on January 4th. That doesn't mean you're behind. Those types of things will happen. But bills that are more than 30 or really more than 60 days old, that's a reflection of something else. So we did cash flow analysis and two different scenarios, which when we did this in late August, it seemed like there would be two different types of potential outcomes here. As we move further on in the year, they've kind of merged together. And I'm just going to flip the script to the other one here and show you the main difference between those two outcomes. The county has been brings in most of its money from the real estate tax revenues, and those have come in pretty much on budget. There's a series of revenues that the county collects at the jail, at a number of different places that are departmental earnings, and those have come in, again, more or less on budget. But there's a very large part of the county's budget that comes from the state, that comes from the Commonwealth, especially related to what we call health and human services. This would be foster care. This would be out-of-home placements. These would be things that are funded generally at the state level and sometimes the state via the federal government. And because the Commonwealth does not have a budget, that means some of the money that would get released to the county in the normal course of things cannot be released. The county gets some of its money from the state for health and human services as a reimbursement, right? I spent the money, I send you the invoice, you reimburse me. And it gets some of the money it gets as an upfront payment. I'm going to spend $7 million on these services this year. Please send me $5 million in advance. It's that latter part that can't happen without the county budget, without the state budget, because you can't get an advance from something that doesn't exist. So the two different scenarios that we had outlined had been, what if the state provides the money that the county needs, is expecting for these services? That would be the high-end scenario that you see there below, right? And that shows You see the $6 million in September, and then what if that doesn't happen? What if the state money, in this case, what if the state money doesn't come through at all? That's what this is showing. Or what if it comes through in 2026, right? So not that the state never has a budget again, but we're talking about the calendar year here. So something that happens after December 31st is not relevant. And you can see that September was the month where the county was really hoping to get $5 million worth of cash. And then December, that would have been a smaller payment. That payment, candidly, has tended to slip into the next year anyway, so that one was always a little less likely. But that $5 million in cash from the Commonwealth to the county is a big deal. How big a deal? Well, it's potentially the difference between running out of cash and not. So you have your two scenarios there. The blue scenario shows what happened if the county received the money on time. You finish with about $3.6 million in cash in hand. The red shows you what if it never arrives, and that's not where we are either, but it shows that you would be a little bit under, and a negative $2.6 million means, in essence, you would be sticking bills aside and waiting to pay them until next year and getting back into that shell game again. So a couple of things about this. One, you're not destined to land on the 2.6. There's nothing that any of us in the room, including the representative from here from DCD, can do to ensure that a state budget will pass. But this is what would happen if nothing else changes and the state budget doesn't, right? The state money is really, really important to Lackawanna County. And by the way, Lackawanna County, not at all unusual in this position. The county that Rose and I are from, or at least work in, Philadelphia, has this issue in spades because it also has the federal government shut down that's upsetting it. But lots of counties around the Commonwealth, if you just Google county cash flow or county budget, you're going to get lots of stories from around Pennsylvania of counties who are depending on the state for this money, for this service, which, by the way, cannot morally or legally not be provided. You cannot say, well, I guess we're not doing foster care this month. No, you're doing foster care and you're paying for it. So the county has to find the way to kind of bridge the gap, candidly, until that cash arrives. If it did arrive, this is the other side of this, it's not like it's the difference between being destitute, poor, and, Scrooge McDuck rich, right? $3.6 million is not a huge balance. Again, remember, if we were talking about a healthy amount of cash here, we'd be shooting for like 20, right? So it's a small margin one way or the other. So what does this mean practically? Well, practically it means that, again, and not much that anyone in the room here can do, but the county, like a lot of other places, really needs the state budget to be passed. That's the first obvious statement. Number two, since that hasn't happened, the county can't just let itself run out of cash and point the finger at Harrisburg. That will have to take measures to, maybe the county is moving towards a position again where it needs to do a hiring freeze like it did last year. I don't think Lackawanna County has tons of open positions. It's not generally been a spendthrift position. You'll see that here in a second. But there might be some things that the county wants to do in the last, 78, 80-something days of the year that it has to wait to do because of the cash flow situation. The last thing is to remember where we were a year ago, right? Where it was $13 million and the county was going to have to do a big borrowing just to get through, and that had nothing to do with the state, right? Even with the state's challenges, none of that's true. The deficit here is much smaller. The county won't need to borrow money to pay its bills this year, to last it over into next year, but the cash position is tight. Again, you'll hear me say this a lot, already have a little bit. It's better. It's a better position than it was a year ago. It would be even better if the state budget were passed, but it's not fixed yet. Let's shift from that to the structural position. So think of cash as one end of the spectrum and structural as the other. The budget's in between, and we're going to kind of land there at the end. But the structural position, structural means do my recurring revenues balance my recurring expenses. We talked a lot about this last year when we were talking about why the county had a projected $31 million deficit going into 2025. It's because there was a significant amount of money that was being held or that was being covered in 2024 by one-time types of moves. Federal surplus money, debt refinancing, reimbursements for health insurance, all of that sort of thing. Where we want to get the county to is where recurring revenues balance recurring expenses. You will still sometimes refinance debt or have health insurance reimbursements. You'll sometimes have things go the other way. Well, you have a capital project you weren't planning on come up. And those things you have to have the cash to be able to deal with. But you want to be able to get to the point where recurring revenues balance recurring expenses, because most of what the county government does here is recurring. It's courts, it's 911, it's foster care, it's those sorts of things that you can't easily turn on and off, unlike, say the federal government, which could just go into a shutdown. So what we're showing you here, very quick summary. Folks can read this more if they really are interested in the methodology. What we are showing is a baseline projection. So this assumes going forward, what if nothing changes, which is not what's going to happen. But we do this as a diagnostic exercise to say, okay, last year when we did this, if we take our hands off the wheel, what happens? It's a $31 million deficit in 2025, and then it grows from there. Now what happens this year? The answer is it's smaller, right? So 2025, I guess it wasn't quite 30, it was 27, rounding up, and where the county ended the year was that with a balanced budget because of some of the things we're going to touch on here in a moment. Next year, at this point last year, we had projected a $30 million deficit for 2026. Now we're projecting a $5.4 million deficit. So if you are focused exclusively on the 2026 budget, which I would understand given where we are in the year, that is what we project if the county does nothing different. That's not what's going to happen. You're going to go through the budget process. You're not going to do nothing different. But hands off the wheel, the budget's not perfectly fixed forever, but 5.4 is not 30, right? And then the gap grows from there for some reasons we can talk about going forward. And the way to think about this is, how can I make that blue bar go away in 2026? How can I make the 5.40 in a way that also shrinks 27, 28, and 29? I don't have to fix all 4 years because I will pass budgets each of those years. But if I can close $5.4 million of the deficit for 26, can I also take that $5.4 million off the deficit in 27 and 28? That is, in essence, what happened with the 2025 budget. A lot of that, if you look at the difference between the blue bar and the white bar, a lot of that difference was closed when the county passed this year's budget, right? They made a number of changes that structurally changed the performance of the county so that 26 and 27 and 28 also all looked better. So what did it do? Well, no big surprise. You were here and lived it and are paying it. So real estate tax increase was certainly a big portion of it, right? What you see here, probably should have changed the header here, because the 2025 budget is what the county is budgeting, and in these cases, largely what is going to spend or collect, right? So the county is budgeting $101 million in real estate tax revenues, and our projection is that it will collect about that much. That 2025 projection is what PFM had projected this county would get in 25 last year. So when we were sitting here a year ago, and I said, well, if you don't do anything, your real estate tax revenues would be about $81 million. So you think of it as a before and after, with the pivot point being the county budget decision. So increasing the real estate tax increased the real estate tax revenues. Not a big surprise there. There were some changes in the budget to increase other departmental revenues. We had our before scenario was $13 million. The after scenario, the one that the county is in right now, is $16 million. Overtime, which I know has been addressed in this room, our before scenario is if you don't do anything different, you spend about $5.4 million. The after scenario, the one you're living in, is spending about $1 million less than that, and it's almost entirely at the prison, right, for reasons that I know have been discussed and have been very positive in terms of changes for staffing and a variety of different things at the prison that have brought that spending down. The pension contribution one I'll hit in a bit, but these are the major pieces that have changed. So the whole doesn't go all the way away, and if you think of these different lines here as being different ideas or initiatives or recommendations, or however you want to think about them, in that very long recovery plan document we talked about, there's more than 4 in there, right? And there'll be more than 4 that the county does. Think of this as these are the first 4 or 5, however you want to think about it, steps that the county's taken to get its financial ship in order. So let's talk a little bit about the pension plan, because it is an important one. It's a big number on this slide, and I don't want to just kind of hand wave it away because it's a $4 million difference. This slide here, let's start by looking at the orange line, the dotted line. That is what's called the ADC, or the Actuarial Defined Contribution. That is the amount that an actuary has said the county needs to put into its pension plan every year to fully fund it. that is based on how many employees you have. It's based on the market value of your investments. It's based on how long you assume people live and work and stay married and when they die and all those other different sorts of things. And in 2017, the county's, the actuary, this is a separate firm that does this, said, Lackawanna County, you need to put $3.3 million into your pension plan. And the county put nothing in. And in 2018, Lackawanna County, you need to put $3.6 million into your pension plan. And the county put nothing in. And in 2019, you need to put $3.9 million, and you can see that that orange line goes up. Think of it as this is the mortgage or the credit card bill that you get where they say, you need to pay the minimum of X to keep the balance from going down. If you didn't do that, the balance would continue to rise. That's effectively what's happening here. Eventually, the county gets to a point where it does start to put money in. That's the blue line. $4 million in 20, $4 million in 21, 22, 23, and you could see it almost catches that orange line. But because it never really equals it, because I'm always putting in a little, at least a little, and sometimes a lot less than what I'm supposed to, the amount I owe continues to grow. The gap between the orange and the blue line accelerates. So last year when we got here, if you focus on the preliminary 2024, it's kind of dead center of the presentation, the county was putting in $4 million, again, much better than in 2017, but at that point, the amount the county was supposed to be putting in was 11. Last year we talked about, okay, well, if you're going to, if you were to do exactly what your actuary told you would, it would be $12 million, and that would not have been practical or affordable. Think of your 33 or whatever percent it was real estate tax increase and now add another $4 million. So that wasn't practical. But bringing it up from the $4 million or the much lower numbers in the earlier part was important, and that's now what the county has done. So this year the county is putting $8 million. It's a doubling of what it was last year. And then the plan going forward is to add, can't really tell because the decimal's not on here, but $1.5 million a year. So I think it would go, it might be like 7.5 to 9 to 11. You see that blue bar where it ticks up. That's the plan. And that's a good plan, right? Look how far the county would have come from 2017 to 2027 in terms of its contribution. Or look at how much of the gap you would have closed between what you're supposed to put in, those columns, and what you're supposed to put in, the line graph at the top, and what you are putting in. The county will catch that number. Eventually, it will start to contribute exactly what the actuary says. But it will take some time to get there because the alternative is just to try and ratchet up your taxes really, really high, really, really fast, and to catch it up front. This is a reasonable way to do this. It's certainly putting more money into the pension plan, and it's doing it on a timetable that I think is realistic. But here's the key thing. Those are just bars on a chart. You have to actually put them in your budget, and you have to actually contribute them.
Gordon, can I ask a question on this slide?
Sure.
When we had last met, you used the example of, I think, Chester. And I know it's different because it's a city versus county, and there's different requirements for municipalities in terms of their minimum contribution. But can you talk about what happened in Chester when they weren't like paying into their pension or weren't paying in enough, and like if we didn't do what we're supposed to do, what eventually happens there?
Yeah, so there's a practical part of it, and there's a statutory part of it. So the practical part of it is Chester for several years. This is the city of Chester, not Chester County. So community of about 30,000 people just south of Philadelphia. For years was not putting money into its police pension plan, largest pension plan they have. And in spring of 2020, right during the pandemic, they had about enough money in the pension plan to make about 2 more pension benefit checks. I mean, like, you would get one in May, you would get one in June, and then you wouldn't get one again, right? So they literally almost ran out the money in their funding in their pension plan, where it was 1% funded. What happened to them? They went into receivership, and now they're in federal bankruptcy. So that's the most extreme case you can have. What happens is if you don't put the money into the plan, the number that you eventually need to catch up, 2 things could happen. One, you can run yourself out of cash and not have pension benefits. I don't think that was an imminent risk here in Lackawanna County. But the more realistic risk is the longer you wait, the more expensive it is. Now, the second part of this, why are we talking about this now? Where were all these cause for alarms in 2017, 2018, 2019? Why now? Is the difference between cities and counties. If a city does not put what's called its minimum municipal obligation, it's basically the same thing as the ADC. If they don't put the money in on December 31st, as you well know from the Scranton experience, the state comes after you hard. You get interest and penalties levied against you. It's a trigger for Act 47. You can lose your state aid, where the state actually puts money into the pension plan for you. For counties, none of that exists. The state doesn't put money into your plan. There's no interest and penalties. So it is actually possible to underfund your pension without the same legal or immediate ramifications as it is for a city. But in the long term, forget all of that, because if I don't put money in, there's nothing to take out. All right. Let's talk about what remains to do going forward. Let's start with the real estate tax revenues, and Rose, I'll let you handle this one.
Yeah, all right. As we saw a few slides ago, by far the biggest step the county took to close the 2025 budget deficit was that large one-time real estate tax rate increase. Even though this increase was super instrumental to closing that 2025 deficit, it doesn't mitigate the fact that going forward, this revenue is expected to remain mostly stagnant. The baseline scenario that we show assumes no changes to the millage rate, so no further increases. So the real estate tax is only projected to grow with any growth to the total assessed value in the county. What this means on a practical level is that your largest revenue source doesn't keep pace with the growth in your expenditures, which are pegged to things that grow faster, like inflation and wage increases set out in collective bargaining agreements. The baseline scenario that we show assumes that the reassessment goes into effect next year and that this is done in a revenue neutral way. So this means the total real estate tax levy remains the same, even though individual residents will see changes to their tax bill. However, under Pennsylvania law, the county actually has the leeway to increase its total levy up to 10%. And small increases in 2026 and years beyond that are what can help your largest revenue source keep up with the growth in the expenditures and not contribute to that widening sort of structural gap we saw a few slides ago. And that's where it starts at 5 million and grows another, 5.5 million from there. Another piece we wanted to highlight when talking about the real estate tax is that we saw in the preliminary results for 2023 and 2024 that the collections rate actually dropped below 90%. Although it's very common for these estimates to be revised up, and this happens because once the auditors take account for 2024 tax revenue that was recorded in 2025, we'll get the full number. So these can be revised up, but the county does really need to monitor this number. And this is because now that the tax levy has gotten so much larger, even a 1% drop in this collections rate means a loss of about $1 million in revenue for the county. So the baseline that we showed a few slides ago, again, starting with the $5.5 million deficit, that assumes that the county hits that 90.3% collection rate. But if this ends up landing closer to 89 and the county maintains it at 89, then the deficits we showed are all going to be $1 million larger. All right, next slide. The second trend we wanted to highlight, and this is comparing our original projection from last year to now this updated projection, is that the net cost of OIFIS operations to the county has increased. And this just results in more uncertainty in that cash flow management that the county is really trying to get a hold of. The figure that you see shows the net cost, which we calculated by adding up the total expenditures associated with the OIFIS department and then subtracting out all of their associated revenue and reimbursements that department receives. And although this net cost has grown compared to our original projection, the OIFIS department is still not a good target for spending cuts. This is because, as we talked about earlier, the spending in this department is reimbursed about 80% between the state and federal government. So any savings you get by cutting spending here is only going to get you 20 cents better on your, kind of your bottom line at the end of the year. And compared to other departments where any cuts to the spending will be a dollar for dollar savings to the county's bottom line. Ultimately, we highlight this because the challenge that the county faces here is not whether the state and federal government will reimburse them, it's when. And we talked about this earlier in the presentation, that the county's cash stability this year really depends on the timing of that $5 million advance payment. But as this OIFIS spending goes up, the county can be left kind of on the hook for ever increasing amounts. So maybe that $5 million advance payment next year, it's 5.5, and the year after that, it's $6 million. And the county has no control of whether this is going to hit before the end of the year. So the county should consider moving the OIFIS operations into its own operating fund, and this can kind of help shield the general fund from some of these fluctuations that the county has no control over. And overall stability in the general fund will be much easier to reach if you don't have to have an annual contingency plan for what happens if we don't get that $6 million, and instead that's shielded outside of the general fund.
Yeah, and this is one of the instances where we said, well, why would you need $20 million in the bank in terms of a cash balances? This is the type of thing you're trying to offset, right? You'd like to get to the point where you have enough cash where you're not entirely dependent on the state to get you the money for the health and human services when it's projected, right? You never get to the point, I don't think it's likely at least, that you get to the point where you're completely not dependent on the state, and that's not the point. Those dollars should be and are reimbursed, as Rose mentioned. It varies by the service, but on average you could figure about 80%, which is why we say a dollar cut in OIFIS is really only worth 20 cents, or you have to cut 5 to get 1. But you'd like to get to the point where you have that kind of stability where you're not as dependent on Harrisburg.
All right. The third trend that we wanted to highlight was the work that the county has already done to manage its salary and wage spending. So again, this was a step we already mentioned that the county took to close the 2025 deficit, and that was the hiring freeze enacted in 2024. And you can see this take effect in 2024, where the year-over-year growth, which is 3.6%, is down from that 2023 level of about 4.5%. So you can see that took effect in 2024. And then the county this year is actually on track to spend about the same as it did last year on salary and wages. And this is super important because the benefits of these actions really compound over time. So now all the future wage increases are going to grow off a smaller base than if the county had not taken the steps it's already taken to help control some of these spendings. We also wanted to talk about this because, again, the baseline, hands off the wheel scenario that we showed is projecting that salary and wage spending will grow about 2.9% year over year. And this is calculated based on, the collective bargaining agreements you already have and what your non-union wages have tended to be in the past. But the county will really need to continue to maintain that headcount management in order to hit that 2.9%. And if you want to go below that, there'll need to be further negotiations and wage savings from bargaining if they want to come in below kind of that 3% number. And the same principle that applied to the savings from 2024 and 2025 also apply to 2026 and 2027, where if you can bring down that total, it just continues to compound because all future wage increases will grow off a smaller base. So this is just another thing where the hands need to stay on the wheel, essentially, but the actions already will have growing returns and compounding returns, and that continues forward.
Yeah, so if you are someone who's, and I hope this is true of everyone, but if you are someone who's especially focused on the cost control side of county government, this is a important slide and something important to focus on. So we've mentioned before that you can't tax your way to financial stability. You also can't leave your tax rate frozen forever and hope that financial stability finds you and stays with you. But you have to be able to manage your spending. This here, the blue bar, these are spending on wages and salaries in the general fund, and there's two good things about this trend. One, you notice the blue bar goes up, so 38 to 38.8 to 39.9 to 41, so the number gets bigger every year. But it's not just that it gets bigger, but it gets bigger faster, right? So the first year it grows by 1.9%, then in 21 by 2.7, then by 4.2, then by 4.5, so it's accelerating. 2024 is the first year it does go up, but it goes up by a lesser amount, right? Remember, we had the hiring freeze about 3/4 of the way or 2/3 of the way through the year. And then this year, while that is the budgeted number, $45 million, county will probably spend less than that because that doesn't assume any vacancies. And obviously there are vacant positions throughout the year. I think our last estimate is that the county would probably save $2 to $3 million in salaries. So where I would expect the county to land is probably closer to 42, which is now not only has the growth, is it not accelerated, but actually went backwards. There were actually reductions. And the lower base creates a lower base going forward. Maybe not a super exciting scenario if you are thinking in terms of wage increases for employees, maybe not a super exciting way to think about this if you're thinking about the number of employees, but this is evidence that the county is closing its budget deficit by doing things other than increasing the real estate tax.
All right, and the fourth and final trend we wanted to highlight, and this was the same trend we highlighted last year, but the county's fastest growing deficit driver is actually its health insurance plans. In 2025, the county has realized some savings on premiums, and they actually kind of maintained flat from 2024. But based on our conversations with the county's insurance broker, these premiums are really expected to jump right back up to their previous growth trend and come in much higher. I think it's about 13% higher next year. And then from then on, we project that they'll grow about 6.5% year over year. And because the county already, this is a big chunk that the county spends, that 6.5% growth rate means an additional $2 million every year on health insurance. So we talked about how the deficit starts at $5.5 million, grows about $5.5 million a year. $2 million of that is just health insurance. So this really just underscores the importance of health insurance as a deficit driver and something that the county will have to consider, pursuing savings and bargaining with its unions and changes to the non-union health insurance plans.
And just one thing to note on this. So last year we did change made healthcare changes to the non-union employees. Thank you.
All right, home stretch. And I'm actually gonna, by the way, the whole presentation will be available. It is not confidential or subject to change at this point, even though that's what the bottom of every slide reads. Pat, I will send you a version without that. I also wanted to change the one header. So for our friends here in the front row, give me a few minutes to do that before we distribute it out there, but you'll have time to see and process all of these numbers. I wanted to talk about defining success, but this talks about it from a structural balance perspective, but I wanted to finish by zooming out a little bit. Here is, from our perspective, what financial success looks like. And keep in mind that this is coming from a company called Public Financial Management, right? So it's not public safety management or public works management or public communications management or any of those other things, right? We bring the lens of finance focus. So, but as we think about what financial success would look like here, talking about it from our three perspectives: cash, budget, which we only talked about a little bit here today, and structure. From a cash flow perspective, you obviously want to get to the place where you can pay all your bills in full, on time. You want to have some reserves throughout the year that serves as a buffer against unexpected events. You want the county to be able to, and the stretch goal here is you want the county to reduce and eliminate the cash flow borrowing early in the year. You would like to get to the point where you're not borrowing as much money to run operations. What does financial stability look like from a budgetary perspective? So you want to make sure that revenues balance with expenses for the next year. You want to have revenues and expenses balanced in each fund, which is very important from a county government because you've got lots of different funds here. And the stretch goal here is you'd like to eventually get to the point where you're not just paying for operations, but you're able to make some investments. What does investments mean? Could be roads, could be bridges, could be in this building, but we're talking about capital improvements. We're talking about investing in things that have a meaningful life because those things, to some extent, you're going to have to do them anyway. Bridges wear down, buildings have problems, cars die, all of those different sorts of things. You have to replace them eventually. You'd like to be able to get to the point where you can do that proactively. So that would be the stretch goal from a budgetary perspective. It doesn't mean in predicting that the county will have a robust capital budget in 2026, but that's the direction that we would like to see the county head. And then from a multi-year perspective, to get to the point where it is unlikely that there is ever a point where someone is doing this exercise, and this slide shows no bar at all, right? Where it shows no deficits. You're totally balanced. By the way, that's true of almost, well, I guess to my knowledge, there are so many of them it's hard to say definitively, but every school district, every town, every borough, every county that I have worked with, right? Pennsylvania governments are reliant, counties extremely so, on a real estate tax. The real estate tax base does not grow every year because reassessment obviously does not happen every year. And so your revenues are naturally slow growing, or in a county's case, very little growing without a tax rate change. So the goal here, a reasonable goal, is not get to a point where the county can balance its budget without ever having tax increases. I don't know if that's mathematically possible. I do know it's practically not likely. So the goal is to get to the point where your budget is within a couple $1 million of out of balance every year, having done the other things you need to do, having decent cash on hand, having a meaningful capital budget, and having that manageable deficit where you can either see the tax base growth cover it, or you make smaller tax increases every year. That's the point that is a reasonable goal for a Pennsylvania county government. It's to see that 5.4 really, if we're talking about this numerically, really kind of halved to around 2.7, $2.5 million. Again, with all of that other stuff that I'm talking about, where you have the adequate cash on hand, and to see that kind of projection going further. Overall, again, remember where we were a year ago in a much, much worse situation. It's not fixed yet, but it's better overall.
Thank you very much. Jonas, did you want to make a statement?
Hello? All right. Thank you very much, Gordon and Rachel, for that presentation. For those of you who don't know, my name is Jonas Krass. I'm a local government specialist with the Governor's Center for Local Government Services. Through this position, we work with over 14 counties here in the Northeast, over 360 different municipalities. And what I will say is Lackawanna's county's position is not unique, but due to multiple years of simply put mismanagement, it has compounded to the position that we are in today. And so I want to take a moment to thank Gordon and Rachel and his whole team for the work that they have done. It is very thorough, and their efforts are definitely taking us to a better position. I also want to thank the commissioner and his team. We've been meeting bi-weekly here to talk about the financial health of the county to get us to where we are today. And I want to thank them for their hard work and dedication. You know, they're making the decisions that aren't necessarily popular, but they are the decisions that need to get done to get us to where we need to be, to get us to that good governance. And today's presentation, I think, is signs that optimism is leading us somewhere that is better, taking us on a better path, and I commend them for doing that. It is the result of hard work and hard decisions, and really just simply putting the people over politics. I also want to thank the residents for their patience and understanding. These things will not be fixed overnight. I've lived here in the city my entire life. I've been a homeowner here for 8 years. These aren't necessarily the things we want to hear with our property taxes going up, but in the Commonwealth, that is the reality. We do have our government rely heavily on those property taxes. So I thank everybody for their time, for their efforts, and I'm optimistic that this time next year we will hopefully be in a better position.
Thank you. Mr. Bulzoni, any comments?
Not today. I'll have enough to say when we're really
Okay, thank you. Just one question, and then I have a couple comments. And I know the answer to this question, Gordon, but if we had not raised taxes 33% last year, where would we be today in 2025?
Well, I mean, I think graphically speaking, this is a pretty good estimate of it, right? It's the white bar, right? So not all of the deficit has been closed by a tax increase. There have been some other changes, but a very large part of it has. I think, candidly, I don't know what a county government shutdown looks like. I've never seen one of those, but I don't know without the increased taxes how you pay your bills the rest of the year, right? Remember, $13 million, if the real estate tax generates, what is it, $100 million or something like that? Is that what our number is? And if you had hit my number, the 81 instead of the 101, What would it look like if you had $20 million last year? Well, I mean, you run out of cash early, lots of bad things happen. It was easy for me to say from being from out of town, although I'm certainly paying my share of taxes in other places too. It was necessary to give you a chance to get to a balance point. And now it's necessary to do things so that that never has to happen again.
Right.
To moderate that.
Thank you. I want to thank PFM and the Department of Community and Economic Development, our CFO, for your work, your candor, and your continued partnership. Today's report confirms what I've been saying all along, that the tough, unpopular decisions that were made last year were not only necessary, but they are working. 1 year ago, this county was in a financial crisis. We were borrowing money just to meet payroll. We were staring down structural deficits that threaten the services that our residents depend on. We were relying on one-time fixes to solve long-term problems. But we chose a different path. We chose responsibility over rhetoric. We raised revenue to meet our obligations. We reduced spending where we could in terms of eliminating an entire department, the health department, 90 positions, and as I mentioned before, changes in healthcare benefits, among a number of different things. We began paying down our debts, and we started building a government that lives within its means. And now, because of those choices, the county's deficit has been cut by tens of millions of dollars. Cash flow has been stabilized, and the county has finally made progress on pensions, payroll, and long-term planning. Leadership isn't always about doing what's easy. It's about doing what's right, even when it may cost you politically. And I want to thank the taxpayers of Lackawanna County for trusting us and the staff here at the county through these difficult decisions. This report shows that the county is turning the corner. There are still many challenges ahead, and we are finally headed in the right direction. We now have a foundation for stability, growth, and accountability. As Gordon said, the preliminary projections are showing about a $5 million deficit for 2026. Commissioner Chermak and I have been working on this deficit together, and I'm confident that next Wednesday when we present the preliminary 2026 budget, that we will present a budget that closes that deficit and does not include a tax increase. My commitment remains the same, to build a county government that's honest with its residents, even when the news may not be good, responsible with its finances, and focuses on the future, not the next headline. Thanks again to PFM, DCED, our county staff, and to all the residents in Lackawanna County who expect and deserve responsible leadership. That path that we're on is working, and we're going to keep moving forward. Commissioner Chermak, any questions or comments?
No, I do want to thank Gordon and your team for today's presentation, Jonas for helping us out. We have a lot of work to do. And we are working on this every single day along with Dave Bulzoni. We look at this budget and things that are going on in this county every minute of every day. We can't be looking in the rearview mirror. We have to look forward. We have to do everything we can to grow our economic growth here in Lackawanna County. We need industry here. We need commercial here. That all helps the residents. So again, this is something that we just have to continually have to work on. All that the PFM presentation here is certainly very helpful in how we're going to move this county forward. And it has been neglected for many, many years, and that's how we got to this point. But I think we're on the right track. I think we have everyone's attention, and believe me, we are working hard, and we are going to deliver a budget that we can both agree on this year. And so we're getting there. So it's taking time, but we are heading in the right direction. Expenses just keep creeping up. The demands that get put on our health and human services just keep growing. I know we get reimbursed 80%, but when it grows exponentially, it adds to unfortunately to our bottom line. But we need to look at different ways that we can combat that. But we're headed in the right direction here, and we got to remain optimistic. So we'll keep on plugging.
Thank you very much. And with that, this public caucus is adjourned. Thank you very much.